Nashville, Noir, Chapter 22. We were halfway back to the hotel when my cell phone rang. Mrs. Fletcher, Detective Biddle here. I understand you called. Yes, I did. Thanks for getting back to me. Cindy's attorney and I have just come from Mrs. Marker's home. I was hoping you'd be able to come with us, but they told me it was your day off. It was my day off. Why did you go to Marker's house? Because we discovered that she lied when she said she wasn't at her husband's office building the evening he was killed. Bitter grunted before asking, and what leads you to that conclusion? A parking ticket. Huh? A parking ticket. Marilyn Marker was issued a parking ticket in front of the building at 5:30 that night. I waited for a response. There wasn't one. Detective Biddle, are you there? Yes, ma'am, I'm here. I think we ought to have a little talk, Mrs. Fletcher, he sounded irked. I'm all for that, I said. Where are you now? Headed back to Renaissance Hotel with Mr. Washburn. We'll be there in a few minutes. I'll meet you there in the bridge. Know it? The upstairs bar and restaurant? Yes, I know it, but I hate to interrupt you when you're off duty. One of these days I'll get smart and not call in for messages. He signed off. I told Jamal what had transpired during the brief conversation and suggested that he be there when I met with Biddle. He agreed with the caveat that if we sensed that the detective didn't want him present, he'd make his excuses and leave. Jamal went directly to the bridge while I made a brief stop in my suite, staying just long enough for Cindy to tell me that she'd spoken with her mother, who was home from the hospital. While Janet was feeling better, she was under doctor's orders to take it easy for at least 2 weeks and not advised not to travel. I also talked to that newspaper writer, Mr. Crump. He called you, I said, unable to hide my preg. Not really. He called you. I only answered the phone because Mama said Emily wanted to talk to me and would call back. He asked for you, but when he knew it was me, he started asking all sorts of questions. I hope you didn't tell him anything, Cindy. I didn't. I said I thought it was probably wrong for me to say anything to a newspaper reporter. I didn't want to be rude and hang up on him, but I did. Rude or not, it was the right thing to do, I said, greatly relieved. While I had asked the hotel to screen our calls and given them a list of those allowed to be put through, slip-ups were bound to occur. I was tempted to call the newspaper to insist that our privacy be respected, but that would have been an exercise in frustration. Whether I liked it or not, the media were always going to pursue a story. Besides, I didn't want to keep Detective Biddle and Jamal waiting. I told Cindy where I'd be in case anyone needed to reach me and went to the bridge, where Detective Biddle and Jamal Washburn had taken a table that afforded a clear view through huge windows of a portion of downtown Nashville. In the distance was the landmark AT&T building, affectionately known as the Batman Building because of its unusual architectural design. Biddle was dressed befitting a scheduled day of leisure, jeans, loafers, open white shirt, and blue cardigan sweater. Mr. Washburn was just telling me how he got the parking ticket logs from the Traffic Violation Bureau. Biddle told me after I had taken my seat. What prompted you to suggest that? A fellow I met at Marker and Whitsun, his name is Buddy, told me that Mrs. Parker spent more in parking tickets than he made each month. It was a wild chance, but I thought it would be worth knowing whether she happened to have gotten one on the night her husband was murdered. And she had for parking at the fire hydrant in front of his building. Are you suggesting that she might have killed him? Biddle asked. I don't know who killed them, but I'm finding more and more people with positive, possible motives. I do have a question for you, however. Shoot. When your officer picked up Cindy a few days after the murder, did she have her cell phone with her? Biddle thought for a moment. I don't recall, but it's easy enough to check. We did have her number. Marcus' secretary, Miss Anderson, gave it to us. I thought she'd gone home from the night. She did, but the security guard had her home number. We asked her to return to the office but didn't tell her why. It must have been a terrible shock for her, I said, feeling sorry for the woman despite her rudeness towards me. She handled it very well. She was the one who told us about seeing Cindy coming in as she was going out. She had a picture of your girl on fire with her cell phone number. So we put out a bolo on her. A bolo stands for be on the lookout for someone. All our patrol officers had MDTs in their vehicles. That's mobile data terminals. We can get information out pretty fast. Anyway, we ran a check on her cell phone to see if she called anyone that day or night, figuring it would help us track her down. Nothing came up. Now I have a question for you. I smiled. Shoot, I said. Who's this guy? Wally Berlin. He's the fellow who Biddle's hard stare caused me to pause. I realized that you didn't know about him and that I should have told you the minute I got his name. But Mrs. Fletcher, Biddle said, I've been pretty easygoing with you since you arrived and started your own investigation. You agree? Yes, and I've appreciated it. I sat down with you and we agreed to exchange information that might be helpful to the attorney here and his client, and might also help the department solve this case. I've taken a lot of ribbon from my colleagues and some criticism from the higher ups. I don't like being kept in the dark. It puts me in an awkward position, Mrs. Fletcher, and makes me think I made a mistake not keeping you far away from Metro Police in general and from this investigation in particular. I understand why you feel that way, Detective, and I assure you I haven't deliberately withheld Wally Brolin's name from you. Sydney was hiding at Wally's place when you were looking for her. I knew that she refused to tell your officers where she spent those few days. When we convinced her to confide in us, I made a point of contacting him. But I neglected to tell you about it. It was my error. And all I can say is I'm sorry. Yeah, he said, shaking his head and sipping the coke he ordered. All right, so now that you've ID'd this guy Berlin, tell me what you learned from him. I took a deep breath. Not very much, I said, except that I'm not sure he's been totally honest with me. I got the feeling he knew Mr. Marker better than he let on at first. I also suspect he might be involved in some way with that song that Cindy wrote and that Marker gave to Sally Prentice to record. Having someone else record that song was a great disappointment to Cindy, but I think that giving Sally a co-writing credit was even more hurtful. And a motive for murder, except that she didn't kill him. He crossed his arms and stared at me. Are you going to follow up on Berlin? I asked. Already sent officers to his house to question him. The girlfriend was there, but he wasn't. Know where he might be? What girlfriend? Biddle shrugged. Some girl who was there said he wasn't home. I have no idea where he might be, I said. Have you checked his cell phone records? All in good time, Mrs. Fletcher. He was silent for a moment. Krupp at the Tennessean wrote that this guy Brolin led the band at the section last night. That's right. They were recording the music for an album with Sally Prentice. We'll check the union to see what other jobs he has scheduled. Good idea. Anything else you haven't told me? Biddle asked. Good heavens, I hope not. Biddle frowned. I mean, I don't believe so. Oh, but Cindy did tell me there was music playing in Marcus' office, which was why she couldn't hear whether he was arguing with someone on the phone or in person. She said she'd forgotten that and only remembered it when I jogged her memory. Biddle sighed. I promise I'll read through my notes to see if there's anything else I haven't discussed with you. If there is, I'll call right away. Biddle turned to Jamal, who sat in silence throughout my conversation with the detectives. You have notes too? He shrugged. I don't have anything, he said. Mrs. Fletcher has ended up my chief investigator. I'm just her sounding board. An occasional accomplice, Biddle added, tearing at the wrapper of a Goo Goo Gluster he'd taken from his pocket. He didn't offer one to us. That reminds me, I said. What about the background check you said you were going to do on Edwana Anderson? Waste of time, Biddle said. We did some checking. She's one of those slaves to routine. Leaves the office every day at 5, arrives home at 5:30, eats dinner, watches Jeopardy, and Wheel of Fortune in bed by 9:30. She visits her great aunt in a nursing home out in Franklin once a week and brings her a gluten-free brownie from the Bonefish Grill. Not exactly a thrilling life. Satisfied? I just thought that it made sense to look into everyone who had a close relationship with the victim. I said, not pleased with my defensive tone. There was nothing in the report about her life before she came to Nashville, I said, thinking of Buddy and the gossip he passed along. Biddle gave me an odd look. You sure do get around, he said, shaking his head. She was cleared of manslaughter in the parking lot accident that took place 30 years ago in Arizona. You think that's relevant? Perhaps, but I don't know the details. I do know that she has a key to the back door, even though she claims she never uses it. That list of key holders we got from the building doesn't shed any light on the case for me. Only the principals, Whitson and Marker, would issue keys, but they obviously made their own duplicates because Anderson wasn't on the list. Or she had the keys made for them, I put in. You could ask her. I don't think she'd respond to me. It's nice to know I have some function in this investigation, Biddle quilped with a wry smile. He downed what was left of his coke and pushed back his chair. I think I'll go back home and try and salvage what's left of my so-called day off. Sure, there's nothing else you've come up with that I should know? I can't think of anything at the moment, I said. You will let me know the results of your check on Wally Brolin's phone records for the night of the murder? Oh, sure, Mrs. Fletcher, he replied. I'd hate to leave you in the dark about anything. Good seeing you, counselor. Maybe you ought to hire Mrs. Fletcher as your full-time investigator and get her to move down to Nashville. Washburn grinned and shook Biddle's hand. If I thought there was a chance that she accept the offer, I have made it days ago. Good seeing you again. Jamal and I lingered over what was left of our soft drinks after Biddle was gone. He's a good guy, Jamal said. I agree, I said. I just hope we can come up with Marcus Killer before he runs out of patience with me. What's next on your agenda, Jessica? I'm not sure. I wish I had more facts to support these gut feelings I have about certain people. For instance, I've never really gotten a handle on Marcus' partner, Louis Whitson. Maybe I should. The arrival of someone else at the table put a stop to my reflection. I looked up into a vaguely familiar face, although I couldn't put my finger on why I knew him. Mrs. Fletcher, he said. Brian Krupp. He pulled out a chair and sat down, dropping his cowboy hat on an empty table behind him. Of course, his picture accompanied his collars in a Tennessean. Sorry to bother you, he said, but I called your suite and Miss Gabriel said you were here in the bridge. Hope I'm not interrupting anything. As a matter of fact, you are, I said. I was just having a conversation with Mr. Washburn, the attorney for Miss Gabriel, Krupp said. How's the case going? Washburn didn't respond. Look, Krupp said, I know you don't want to talk to me. It's an ongoing case. Yada yada. I understand all that, but maybe talking to me will be beneficial to Miss Gabriel and your case. There's something to think about, right? He raised both hands. See? No tricks up my sleeve. He pulled open his jacket to reveal a plain white t-shirt. No wires, no nothing. Just give me 10 minutes. I won't ask any questions, but I will share some information that I've dug up that might interest you. If it does and you want more, I have a proposal for you. It's no commitment on your part until you hear me out. Deal? I was poised to tell him no, but there was something about his directness that kept me from doing it. Maybe it was his youthful, almost boyish face that won me over, despite my inherent caution when it comes to being open with a reporter when something sensitive is involved. I know they have their job to do, but it's an important one in our society. But there have been a few instances in my career when they weren't as forthright and well honest in their reporting as I would have hoped. I'm listening, I said. Washburn immediately stood. I have some place I have to be, he said. Nice meeting you, Mr. Krupp, and thanks for spelling my name right. To me, give me a call later, Jessica. I'll be in my office. Looks like I scared him off, Krupp said, pulling his hat from the other table and dropping it in the chair Jamal had vacated. It wouldn't look right for him to be sitting with a reporter in a bar in the middle of a case, I offered. So, Mrs. Krupp, I'll take you at your word. 10 minutes without questions from you while I listen to what you have to say. Then we talk deal, he said pleasantly. What do you know about Louis Whitson, Roderick Marcus' partner? He asked. You've already broken your promise, I said. You asked a question. He laughed, just my way of leading in to what I have to say. Won't happen again, I think. Okay, I don't know if your young friend, Cindy Gabriel, aka Cindy Blaskow Spears, killed Marker or not. But if she didn't, that means somebody else did. A logical assumption. He ignored my sarcasm and said, the thing is, this little girl from out of town stepped into a real pit of vapors and Marker and Whitson. There have been rumors floating around about that firm for years. I had a feeling I wasn't the only person to whom Buddy had talked so freely. You know, Nashville may be a big city, but at heart it's really a small town, Krupp said, signaling to a waitress. Got any local brew, Blackstone ale? He asked when she arrived at the table. No. Okay, let me have a Sam's Adam, he turned to me. What about you, Mrs. Fletcher? I'm fine as I am, I said, marveling at how he was going to turn 10 minutes into an extended conversation by ordering a beer. Where was I? He said. Oh, yeah, small town. It's the music industry. Everybody knows everybody. It's hard to keep a secret here. We know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, although sometimes they switch places. So the way I see it is if it wasn't Cindy, it had to have been someone closely involved with Marker, not some stranger. Also logical? I nodded. I did some checking around about Whitson. To put it simply, he and Marco weren't bosom buddies, and in fact, sources tell me that they were about to split up the partnership. My raised eyebrows said that he captured my interest, although a breach between the partners didn't come as a complete surprise. Whitson had moved into Marco's office with unseemly haste, in my view, even before its previous occupant had been buried. A couple of months ago, he continued, Whitson and Marco actually got into a shoving match at a local bar. According to someone who was there, Whitson, he's bigger than Marco, knocked his partner down. Were the police called? Yeah, they were, but neither of them brought charges. But my informant says Whitson accused his partner of skimming funds from the company and potentially putting it in hot water with the IRS. Once they officially parted, Whitson would have been left holding the bag. Now, Krupp's eyebrows were raised. Motive for murder? Yes. And he paused when the waitress came to the table and set down his bottle of beer. As I was about to say, there's more to the bad blood between Mark and Whitson than business dealings. I pick up on scuttlebutt around town. That's my job. Been doing it a long time, which I understand we're very good at, I said. I have my moments. Anyway, rumor has it that Whitson and Marcus' wife Madeline, or how can I put it delicately? You don't have to put it delicately, I said. Okay, Whitson and Mrs. Marker had been having an affair, which Marker learned about. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. Interesting, he said, so far. Go on. On top of that, Marker was an inveterate grapper, like grouping pretty young women. The guy is a serial adulterer, according to those in the know. He's a number of extramartial affairs, including, including, I urge, wondering if this tabloid snapshot of Nashville matched Detective Biddle's suspensions. Well, there's talk about Nashville's up-and-coming country music star, Sally Prentice, but she adamantly denies it. Me thinks she does protest too much. And Whitson was the one who introduced her to Marker. He sat back, took a long swig of his drink, and smiled smugly, as though he just delivered a knockout blow. This is all very interesting, I said, but it doesn't point a finger directly at Whitson as a murderer. He came forward again. If I were looking for who killed Marker, he said, I'd put my money on a greedy business partner. I chose to fire away his conclusion and asked whether he had information about anyone else closely associated with Marker. Isn't this enough? He said. That's another question, I said. He snorted. Sorry, what you've told me is interesting. Nothing more. Just how do I apply it to solving Marker's murder and exonerating Cindy Gabriel? That's your problem, he said. He was right. It was my problem. And Cindy's? Let me ask you a question, I said. Why did you decide to share this with me? Because I happen to know you're an honorable woman. I've done the research, so if you use what I've given you to break this case open, I figure you owe me first crack at writing about it. That seems fair enough, Mr. Krupp. My friends call me Brian. I smiled. All right, Brian. You'll be the first to know if I accomplish what I've set out to do. The first reporter to know, that is. He insisted upon paying, grabbed his hat from the chair, and we went to the lobby. Thanks for your time, he said, shaking my hand. And thank you for the information. Oh, since you seem to have learned a great deal about the victim, Roderick Marker, what have you uncovered about others at the firm? A fellow named Buddy, or Mr. Marker's secretary, Edwana Anderson? His grin was devious. Buddy? Where do you think I got a lot of this information? Buddy's a character. Loves scandal and juicy stuff inside. He's been filling my columns for a long time. As for Eddie Anderson, she's harmless enough unless you believe Buddy's story about her. The accident in the parking lot? My, Mrs. Fletcher. You're in the wrong field. Ever consider writing for a newspaper? What did Buddy tell you? What did he tell you? He shook his head. I heard it years ago. Supposedly she's related to Marker in some second or third removed sort of relationship. Cousin? Sister-in-law? Not sure. She got into a messy legal jam somewhere out west. California, Oregon, someplace like that. Seems she killed some guy. I think she was charged with manslaughter, but beat the rap. Another guy here in town who was writing for one of the tabloids, the Star, I think tried to nail it down but hit a brick wall, record sealed, unclear why, and dropped the story. She moved home to Nashville, and when Marker and Woodson opened, the family prevailed upon him to give her a job. That's all I know except that she's a little weird. Well, I said, not anxious to add my own evaluation of Edwana Anderson to his tabloid view. Thanks for sharing all this with me. I hope you succeed in coming up with Marcus' killer, Mrs. Fletcher. Even if it turns out to be Cindy Gabriel, it'll make a great story. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye!